This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece. As I reported from Istanbul, Turkey in late April of this year, a coalition of humanitarian organizations had planned to send 3 cargo vessels to Gaza in order to deliver desperately needed humanitarian supplies. I was hoping to be a passenger on one of those vessels and had secured a spot, but the Israeli government at the 11th hour pulled a rabbit out of the hat, and by pressuring the government of Guinea-Bissau to withdraw its flag from 2 of the 3 vessels, it effectively stranded those 3 humanitarian vessels in Turkish waters. There is, however, a plan B. A little vessel under a Norwegian flag by the name of Handala is slowly making its way around the western coast of Europe and down into the Mediterranean to try to break the siege of Gaza again. And today I had the opportunity to speak with one of the passengers on that vessel. His name is John Turnbull, and he's a Canadian citizen from Vancouver. John is aboard the Handala during its English Channel voyage to Ireland and France. In 2018, he was the captain of the sailing vessel Freedom. Sailing and history have always been 2 passions in his life. Raised as a Unitarian, he has also been an activist for justice, and working with a Canadian boat to Gaza was a natural progression. He participated on a Canadian boat to Gaza, the Tahrir, in Greece and Turkey as ground and support crew, as well as being on the 2018 mission. Here's what John had to say today from New Rochelle, France. So, John, why don't you start by telling us, where is the vessel today? Where are you? And where have you come from?
Well, we're in La Rochelle, France, about halfway down the French coast. We're in a fishing port. A lot of activity here with fishing boats coming and going. Not easily accessible to La Rochelle itself, unfortunately, and that's a political, I think, largely a political decision. We get a cool reception in some ports. We can talk about that later. The ship itself is Norwegian. It started in Oslo, Norway, around about the early part of May, and made its way through Scandinavia, obviously down the Atlantic coast, Germany, etc. There are details about the ports we got into. It didn't get into there, which we can talk about later. And we have made our way from Brest, which is on the very nose of France, sticking out into the Atlantic, and then to La Rochelle, where we're waiting to set our course for Santander, Spain, tomorrow.
And you're currently on the deck of the vessel, right?
I am on the deck of the Handala. Behind me is one of our wonderful graffiti artworks. There are lots of others I can show you as well.
So before we do that, can you tell us a little bit about this cool reception? You know, those of us who haven't been in Northern European countries during the genocidal assault on Gaza have read a great deal about efforts of the police, the governments, even prosecutors to stifle protests, criticism of Israel, dissent against Western government policies. During your time on the Handala and your visit to these ports, what have you seen, which, if anything, which reflects these images that we're seeing of the brutal suppression of protests by Western governments?
Well, what we see when we enter ports, I'll describe 3 phenomena. One is the extra, but very restrained and legalistic attention from coast guards and navies here in France, as well as in Germany and the Netherlands. Not, by the way, in Ireland. Totally different story there. So we see that attention. It's brisk, it's passport checks, that kind of thing, but out at sea, which is not normal for a passenger ship entering a port. Then when we get into the port, we discover that there has been usually a weeks-long back and forth with local political authorities, especially here in France, in which the town itself argues often quite aggressively with the regional authority. As you know, in France, there are regional prefects that have a national authority. The prefects don't want us here, would rather we just go away, of course. The local supporters argue successfully to get us into the port and to treat us as welcome guests. And so the important thing is that when people show up on the quay, there are a lot of them. They support us. They express their admiration for what we're doing, and vice versa. They help us. They drive us around town, get us groceries, help fix our boat. The response from the French people and people in general is always very welcoming.
Now, I understand that this particular voyage, you will be disengaging from the flotilla on Thursday, tomorrow. But as those of our viewers who have followed my journalism over the years will know, this is not the first time you have been on the boat to Gaza. And in fact, in 2018, you went all the way. I interviewed you at the time for The Real News, and I'm going to put a link to that interview in the description to this interview on YouTube. But for our purposes now, if you could just summarize what happened in 2018 when the vessel you were on tried to break the siege and reach the shores of Gaza.
Yes. I always have to begin this story with the fact that my wife, Karen DeVito, now in near Vancouver, was on the 2011 campaign. And it was because of her involvement that I then became more directly involved in 2018. Very briefly, we left Palermo after a long delivery of the ship through Europe, similar to this delivery. We left Palermo in Sicily, headed out across to Gaza. In some senses, a very easy voyage because it was pretty much a straight line. We were picked up off the shore of Gaza. I think we were 45 or 6 nautical miles out, well beyond the traditional 12-mile limit, but well within what the Israelis like to call their military exclusion zone, which is legal nonsense. We were picked up. The crew of the Swedish vessel Freedom had decided by consensus in advance that we would not offer any physical resistance to our capture, and we pretty much did not. It was a bit of a mess with a lot of fresh recruits to the IDF who were not accustomed to being aboard a sailboat in the middle of the night. That was kind of comical. There was a Keystone Cops aspect to it. We were taken to jail. We stayed there for, I think it was 3 or 4 days, not badly treated. We were whisked away quickly and quietly by our various consuls and embassies in Israel. And that was pretty much the end of the story until you interviewed me that year in Paris. I'll add one detail that I think is personally very important to me and I think is illustrative of this journey. When we were captured, we could see from the ship, from our sailboat, the loom over Israel. That is, we were at the point of division, the border wall, border fence between Israel near Ashdod, Ashkelon, and then on the right-hand side of our field division, Gaza. And it struck me very deeply that I could see the typical loom over the city, buses running at night, street lights, activity, industrial activity, people living their lives as we hope everybody can. On the right-hand side of my vision, absolute blackness. This was 2018. The lights were off. 2 million people were imprisoned behind that wall of blackness. I could not see them. I could not see any evidence of them. And yet I knew that that year in 2018, they were still going to the fence in Gaza and being shot by snipers and being injured in their dozens. That very day, that Friday, August 5, they were still doing that. And here I was looking at them imprisoned in the middle of the night, and there was nothing we could do about that.
Mm-hmm. And of course, one of the persons who was shot by Israeli snipers in the Great March of Return was a Canadian-Palestinian doctor by name of Tarek Loubani, who was out in the field wearing medical gear, tending to other civilians who were being gunned down mercilessly by the Israeli military. A question that I'm very curious to know, John, because I myself was in Istanbul when a few weeks ago and had been granted the privilege of being on one of the 3 vessels that were intended to depart from Istanbul and travel to Gaza with thousands of tons of humanitarian aid. And as you know, at the 11th hour, the government of Guinea-Bissau, whose president recently visited Israel and was described by its president Herzog as a true friend of Israel, at the 11th hour, he instructed his government to withdraw its flag from 2 of the 3 vessels, and now they're effectively stranded, as I understand it, in Turkish waters. The Handala, of course, is not, fortunately, bearing the flag of Guinea-Bissau. What flag does it have? And is there any indication that it, I mean, based on what you know, obviously we can't say for certain whether at the 11th hour Israel is going to pull another rabbit out of the hat, but based on what you currently know, is there any reason to believe that this vessel will be prevented by, some European government or some other government, I'm not talking about Israel, obviously, from even getting near the shores of Gaza?
Well, I believe it may be prevented from getting near the shore of Gaza. It may be captured by the IDF, as we have been in the past. Hard to predict. This year is very different. It may be turned away by US naval vessels or British or even Canadian vessels. They're all there. As to the voyage from here to the Eastern Med, this boat travels under a Norwegian flag. It is legally a Norwegian boat. It is also legally a private ship or passenger pleasure boat, if you wish, although it's not all pleasure. So legally, there is no obvious way for any government to stop us from doing what we wish to do. Now, all of this, of course, becomes quasi-legal as we enter the Eastern Med. I won't try to predict exactly what will happen there.
And lastly, John, could you talk to us a little bit about, I mean, all of you are on a vessel in Northern Europe, but you're keenly, painfully aware of the horrors being visited upon the people of Gaza as we speak. What is the spirit amongst the passengers on the vessel? And can you tell us a little bit about who's on that boat with you at this time?
It's an interesting phenomenon. The spirit is resolute. On the other hand, as is so often the case with a humanitarian mission, you're tied up in the almost minute-to-minute detail of operating the ship, provisioning it, speaking to people, organizing the crew, training. There's just a training session going on here a moment ago. You're tied up in the moment-to-moment, and you don't really think about either the personal risk or in some cases, you tend to forget the political dire situation. That's a bomb psychologically. The activity is what prevents our depression about this genocide. But as I leave the ship, I'm very conscious of this myself. I'm not just leaving a bunch of people I've grown to admire and love, really expert, really dedicated people who operate in all kinds of areas of humanitarian effort. I'm leaving them, but I also realize that I'm not going to be there when this finally happens, unless I can call it back. And so it's a difficult situation to be in psychologically. You stay busy, and then suddenly you realize this is a genocide. Let me illustrate that with a little conversation I had with a wonderful war zone nurse who was aboard, an Irish woman, Eva. And I asked her, "Why are you on this boat?" I was interviewing her for that another purpose, like you are. She had difficulty saying why this boat. And then the next morning she said, I sorted all that out in my mind. I'm going to use some language here. She said, because it's a fucking genocide. And that's the way, in the end, we all feel. When we have that moment, we look forward on the ship, we see the painting of Handala there, and suddenly we realize it's because it's a genocide.
Well, John, thank you so much for speaking with me today, and thank you for your wonderful commitment to the cause of justice for the Palestinian people. And I wish you all a safe voyage, and I hope to have the opportunity to join the vessel in Malta. Fingers are crossed. Until then, stay safe, brother.
Thank you. And Dimitri, we thank you all of your fans on your blog and these YouTube videos. we thank you very much for all the involvement you've had in all aspects of this. And good luck to you, and we'll see you again soon.
See you soon, brother. Bye-bye.